Hello and welcome back to Valley Sports Telegram presents the Sports Telegram. As always, I'm Arshavir Saryan, joined by Kenny Hodges, and we're just going to roll through what's been a crazy summer so far. We're going to go over the joy that is Major League Baseball. We have questions, we've got surprises, and we've got the big one. Free agency's looming, and we'll get into him in a moment. And we know there's a trade deadline going. But Kenny, how's your summer?
Hey man, it's been a long time. We should have left you without some sports opinions to step to, but you know what? We here, we bringing it live and direct. Been an okay summer, been all over the place, been doing a lot of things. But at the same time, been also keeping a keen eye on these sports teams that we cover and we love to watch. And boy, we can get into my favorite team and the disaster that the season has been. But let's go ahead and roll right into it, man. Let's jump in.
Let's do it. We are at this point, into the second half. All-Star game has passed. And, hey, the National League won for the first time in forever, right?
12 years.
Yep. And now we're looking, going into the stretch run, who's putting it together and who's falling apart. I think it's safe to say that there's some teams that have already fallen apart, and the question isn't, are they falling? It hurts for you, Kenny, but your Mets are kind of right there in that fallen apart state. What happened?
All right, you know what? Listen, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get right into it. It's been an unmitigated disaster. The most expensive team in the history of the sport, and we just have, quite frankly, just have not lived up to expectations. Some of the people we've spent money on just have not delivered. Verlander missed a great chunk at the beginning of the season, and when he has pitched, he's been very up and down. He'll give you a great performance, and then the next two won't be so great. Max Scherzer is finally starting to look his age when he hasn't up to this point, which was always sort of the fear of giving him a 3-year deal when we signed him before the beginning of last season, was that what would he look like in year 2, year 3 of that deal for the amount of money that we gave him? And he has not pitched well. The depth behind him hasn't been great. Tyler McGill was somebody who the Mets expected to kind of help them in the rotation. He's struggling down in AAA. Cookie Carrasco hasn't been the same since he came to the Mets. So, and then when we have pitched well, that's when the bats have sort of gone to sleep. Pete has had great power numbers, but no one in that lineup is hitting for average. Even Jeff McNeil, who was the National League batting champ last year, has struggled with consistency this year. Francisco Lindor hasn't hit for average. He's got the numbers, but the reason why he wasn't an all-star is because he's hitting 211. That's not good enough for a guy who you're paying $300 million. There's also a weird thing going on with the New York Mets where we seem to be caught between two worlds, where we've got these veterans that we've shelled out the big bucks for the last 3 or 4 years, but we've also got this handful of crop, the babies, the rookies that we've brought up, and Brett Beatty at third base, Francisco Alvarez. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've seen what that kid has done, tearing the cover off the baseball, hitting balls 400, 500 feet since he came up. You got Mark Vientos. We got a kid down in the minors, Ronnie Mauricio, who looks like an Alfonso Soriano clone. There's no place for him to play because we are loaded with veteran talent, and there's just not. It's hard for these kids to find ABs. So we're at an impasse here because the season hasn't gone the way we wanted to. We are 18 and a half games out of first. We're 8 games out of the wild card. We got to jump. Feels like the entire National League just to get into the playoffs. So now the question over the course of the next week as we approach the deadline is, what do they do? We know for a fact the Dodgers have kicked the tires on Verlander a little bit because they were kicking the tires on him in the offseason. Mets came through with a better offer. He appears to be a guy that we could trade at the deadline if we needed to, but it's just been a disaster. I mean, every time you have a little bit of hope that they might be able to get back into the race. I mean, this was a team that won 100 games last year. Then we go and do what we did this weekend and drop 2 out of 3 to Boston, and it just feels like we're sinking further and further back. So I don't know what the answer is. I think we might end up being dealers at the deadline just to sort of make space for these rookies who are going to need to play down the stretch, in my opinion. But it has been a disaster, and it has not been the season I thought it was going to be.
No, it hasn't. And to add a piece onto that, Jeff McNeil was so disappointing. I dropped him off my fantasy team. He led me last year. He led me to a championship last year, and I tried to hold on to him, but he didn't make it through May. Like, I gave him a lot of skirt. But, you know, I'm trying to repeat here. But that's the key thing, right? Is you're not in contention. You're not playing for anything. So make room for these kids so you can see what you got.
Yeah.
Why not, right? Other than that, you're going to play out the string and you're going to piss off veterans who are just losing for no reason. At least the other way, you bring up these kids and they're going to infuse some energy into that clubhouse, right? They're excited to be there. And what you tell them is, hey, guess what? You come up, you perform, you could be a key part of this future. Or they come up and they show they've got that potential to perform, and now they could get packaged over the winter. When you've got that deep of a farm system, you have to be able to wield it as a weapon 2 ways. You use it to fill holes or you use it to make trades. And you know, that kind of segues me into my team, as we all know, being the Dodgers. That's what they've done for the last decade, pretty much, right? Ever since the Guggenheim partners wielded all that money and bought the team, they said, well, you know, spending $150 million every year is not sustainable. Okay, what do? They replenish the farm system, and whenever they need to, they package it together and make a deal. Yes, it's only resulted in 1 championship, but it brought Mookie Betts in. Right. It set up the situation where they could actually pick up, you know, someone like Freddie Freeman. You know, they've made trades in season for a Yu Darvish, for, you know, Manny Machado. Yeah, they didn't do anything to him. You know, they brought in Scherzer and Trey Turner, and we got a great year and a half out of Turner. So that key of looking at who you have is going to be important, especially for you guys now, the next 60 days. You can end the season, you can look at it and be like, okay, these kids that are raking in AAA, it translates. And if it doesn't translate, then okay, we still have a hole.
What I was hoping would happen with the Mets is what eventually did happen with the Dodgers, like something that we talked about a while ago when they were struggling, is that we saw what Arizona and San Francisco were doing, but I didn't necessarily believe it was sustainable for an entire season. Not when you look at what the Dodgers are as a team. I thought that the pack would come back to them, even if they struggled, and they have. You know, that Dustin May going down hurt a lot. Kershaw not being healthy has hurt a lot. They've been up and down. That staff has sort of been up and down. But when you look at how talented this roster is, you sort of kind of felt like they would sort of right themselves. If for no other reason that this team will always hit, for the love of God. How many grand slams is it this year? Like 9 or so. It's an absurd number. Chris Taylor, I keep waiting for him to not be good, but he just keeps producing. There's something about this uniform since he put it on that the man just produces. So you thought that they would end up back in this spot. Now, the question for them is, it's not the division anymore. It's going to be when you look across the way and you look across to the opposite coast and you see the Atlanta Braves and how scary that team is. What are the Dodgers going to do in terms of postseason positioning? Are they going to be buyers at the deadline trying to fill holes? And in your opinion, as a Dodger fan, what is the biggest need you'd like to see them fill at the deadline to make them more of a viable contender to take down that Braves team? Besides the obvious, we know what the obvious, what you'd want, what everybody would want. But let's say he's off the table because Artie Moreno has publicly said you can't have him. So since Artie Moreno saying no boo boo to that guy, you can't have him. What would you like to see the Dodgers do, not named Shohei, to try to make a run at the Braves, who are the standard in the National League at the moment?
Well, they need a bat and an arm. Simple as that. We touched on Dylan Cease a couple months ago. I still think he's a viable candidate considering everything. I don't really know what kind of a bat they would get. Maybe someone would be like a utility middle infielder. Kike Hernandez could come back.
Mm-hmm.
He was super everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, before I go, did that actually pop up and interrupt as a sound?
Faintly, but if you were talking, you can't really hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Kike Hernandez could come back, right? He was Mr. Everything, a super utility guy for them in that time when they won the title in 2020. So you look at that, okay. I'd like him. Dodger fans would love him back. And it could happen. The thing that still bothers me every time, and they just played them over the weekend, was Corey Seager choosing to walk. I was like, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, right? I mean, it was an absurd amount of money that Texas threw at him.
Yeah. And he's done what he did with the Dodgers. First pitch masher, continues to rake. Yes, he sprained his thumb because he thought he could beat. And he did. He challenged Mookie Betts, and he beat him. Right? He turned a single into a double and sprained his thumb.
Mm-hmm.
He's my pipe dream coming back, especially because Kike's in the market to come back potentially. But that's what you need. You need a bat who's going to provide you decent average and can play kind of everywhere. And that's what Kike Hernandez does. You're going to need at least one arm. I'm going to pin my hopes to Dylan Cease right now. Mm-hmm. But who knows? They've pulled names out of nowhere before, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, this is actually a pretty good deal. So I have faith in that front office doing what they're supposed to do. But I
got two names for you. They're both on the Cubs. One of them is very familiar to this part of town. I think Stroman can be had because I think he can opt out after this year. So I think the Cubs might be willing to trade him, and he's also struggled down the stretch. But like I said, sometimes coming to LA is that magic dust you need, especially with a good team. And he is an incredible fielder at his position. All he's got to do is keep the ball in the ballpark with this team. And I think Marcus Stroman could be a really good fit for this Dodgers team down the stretch. And your boy Cody is hey, listen, I know. The way his tenure ended in LA was not great. But he's figured out some things the last 3 weeks, and his numbers have been pretty nice. But as a rental, he's a guy that he's familiar. You can play him 3 or 4 places. I'm just saying you could probably get him from pretty much nothing. And he can be that extra bat. That's all I'm saying.
He could. He'd be the lefty bat, and Kike could be the righty bat. I'm pinning my hope there. Look, I love me some Cody Bellinger. Always have. I just don't know if they would pull the trigger on it, considering the divorce was kind of acrimonious. He didn't seem very happy that he was non-tendered. And I mean, who knows? He might be showing something that he's actually turned the corner. I almost said Rivers because they call Dave Roberts Doc. And in my head, I was thinking Doc. Dave Roberts hinted. He didn't say it explicitly that there might have been a work ethic type issue in terms of this is my swing and this is my swing.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter how much the Dodgers try to help him, he didn't try to help himself.
Yeah.
So those were hinted at in the spring. They didn't throw him under the bus completely. And they sure as heck didn't, pop it in reverse and run over him again. So maybe. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, Stroman could be a heck of a get. But the question is how much are they going to ask because he has the option, so that's technically control.
Mm-hmm.
The more time on the contract, the more they're going to want. How much are you willing to give up? So there really is kind of those questions there. But the big one before we segue out into our next topic that you touched on a moment ago is the Dodgers putting it together. Yeah, they're in first place. They're where we thought they would be. But in the back of my head, as I watched them go on this torrid hitting streak for the last 2 weeks, I'm like, y'all need to get cold in August so you can heat up again in September. There's ain't no way I'm watching your bats go cold the last 2 weeks of September thinking, okay, it's the last 2 weeks. We'll figure, the bats will come alive, and then they're ice cold in that first round, and you're out. Because that you can't have that happen. It's baseball. Bats go cold all the time, right? That's the crapshoot of the playoffs, regardless of sport. You're talking a 3-game series, a 5-game series, or a 7-game series. There's a lot of randomness in there, and that's my hope. I want those bats to go cold in August so they can heat up again in time.
I tell you this, my friend. You are speaking from a place of luxury that me as a Mets fan, I know nothing about, because you're talking about bats going cold, and I am sitting here saying I'd shove an old lady for 2 weeks of hot bats because maybe we could get back in the race if somebody other than Brandon Nimmo could actually hit the ball consistently for 2 weeks in this lineup on Francisco Alvarez. That's all I'm saying. I'll settle for any stretch of this season. The Mets bats getting hot for 2 weeks. I'll leave it there.
It could happen, and Brandon Nimmo's been good for me. He's helping me kind of push towards that repeat.
Biggest robbery from the All-Star game. He should have been an All-Star this year, not Pete. I love Pete Alonso. If there was only going to be one Mets everyday player that made the All-Star game, it shouldn't have been Pete Alonso. Brandon Nimmo has been one of, if not a top 3 center fielder in the National League this entire season. He got robbed.
Oh yeah, he's been consistent all season. He's been money. And he's a guy that has taken him a few years to put it together. He's been in your system for a long time now.
Mm-hmm. I was glad we kept him because Brandon Nimmo felt like the kind of guy the Dodgers would snatch up.
Justin Turner 2.0.
Yes. So the fact that we were able to keep him on a reasonable deal compared to some of the other money we've shelled out, I was very happy about that. So, but that's enough. That's enough Mets talk for one day.
Well, we've got the trade deadline is in 1 week. And we talked about this off camera. We've talked about it in our previous recordings. We touched on it very so briefly today. But let's dive into this, baby, shall we? I think you and I kind of had somewhat differing opinions on Shohei Ohtani getting traded or where he might sign, kind of based on where the Angels are. I'm going to let you start because I have a pretty heated view on what's going to happen here. And I'll jump into it after you. What do you think might happen with Shohei?
I think, well, let's start here. I think they'd be stupid to not deal him. If they were able to find a buyer, or someone who'd be willing to give you a couple of top level prospects for him, and he'd be willing to go because the man he has been adamant about chasing championships. He didn't come to the States just for the scenery. He came here because he wants to win. If there was an options on the table, even if it was down to 405, you should take it, because I don't think they're going to be able to retain him. I even listened to Mike Trout on Mookie Betts' podcast, and I thought it was pretty telling that even a guy like Trout was like, oh, he essentially was saying without saying he'd be dumb to not test free agency because he's going to be the first guy probably to hit $500 million on a free agency contract. Since you know he's going to hit free agency, and there is a good possibility that depending on how this season plays out, he is not going to stay. You have got to deal that guy and get something. You will look like the most inept organization we have ever seen to have a modern Babe Ruth in your lap, and he just left, and you had no postseasons to show for it. You got nothing back in return for the guy. You have to deal him. So I think they're going to. I know it may not seem or feel likely. I just think the teams that they are chasing, I don't know if even having a healthy Trout and Shohei, and even if Rendon came back, I don't know if they are equipped to chase down some of these teams that they need to leap forward. When you look at who's in front of them, in the Yankees, in the Red Sox, in the Blue Jays, and now mind you, it's 3 wild card spots, so you only need to leapfrog a couple of them. But I don't believe in them over the Blue Jays. I don't believe in them over Houston or Texas. They're definitely not better than Tampa Bay. Boston is kind of had Jekyll and Hyde, but if it was me for my life, what I feel like when I watch the Angels, I'm taking the Red Sox over the Angels at this point. So I don't think they have enough in the tank to get over the hump to the postseason, even if Trout comes back. So I deal him.
And that's what pretty much everyone is saying, because the Angels are almost guaranteed to lose Shohei this fall. But here's the thing, right? Artie Moreno said he is not trading him to the Dodgers. Forget about it. It ain't happening. We can, as Dodger fans, keep dreaming about paying him $500+ million in November. But outside of that, he's not going to be wearing Dodger blue. Okay, there's that. But you just rattled off a list of teams, and the Angels need to get past 3 of them. And it could very well happen. And here's what we were talking about off air that is very interesting to me when I look at this, right? This team, for the first time in a very, very long time, is playing plus baseball. They're currently 2 games over 500, 6-4 in their last 10. They've actually managed to stay afloat despite all the injuries. They're in a position that Artie Moreno wanted them to be in, because now they have a tough decision. Perry Manassian said he doesn't want to trade Shohei if they're in contention. I think they know they're going to lose him for nothing. But this is also an owner who was about to sell the team before he realized he might have had a chance to keep Shohei. So you're 4 games out in the wild card. Division is done. I don't believe they're catching Texas. Forget about it. They're 4 games out of the wild card. Their schedule for the next 30 days is very winnable. I mean, this team should, based on what they've shown they can do. Again, it's a consistency issue with them, right? This team over the next 30 days should go something like 18-10. You know, heck, they could do better than that. But if the Angels rip off a couple of these, 7-3 streaks, which they're very well able to do, look at the schedule, who they're playing. You telling me they can't make up 4 games out of 60? It's just a matter of playing the way they are, and that right there is pretty much Perry Manassian looking at his team, saying, "Okay, if I fix around the edges and I get a bat, it doesn't have to be a massive purchase." And I'm going to go back to Kike Hernandez because he's probably not going to be expensive.
Yeah,
he's not a superstar player. He's a player that can probably be got for a couple prospects, and you don't hurt your major league club, right? There's other players of that ilk, but he's at the top of my mind, and we know why. Maybe you get a back of the rotation starter, someone they need bullpen help. So you pick up a mid-level bat, get someone in the bullpen, and believe you can make up those 4 games. And the teams that they're playing over the next, again, month and a half are teams that they're in contention with, teams that they can beat, and some bottom feeders. So you look at this team as an executive, and your answer is, well, we should be able to win these games. Why not help this team win these games? Let me go grab a small bat. I don't need the biggest bat on the market. I need a productive, a piece. And I mean, the problem is some of those pieces are being bid on, right? Where's the bidding war? So if you're Perry Manassian and you're in this position, if I'm Perry Manassian in this position, I identify somebody who's probably not going to be in a bidding war that maybe is being overlooked, or, right? Everyone is busy talking about these 3-4 names at the top, right? And they're kind of kicking tires on everyone else, but those are plan B, plan C. Maybe I make someone's plan B my plan A, and I get him for cheaper because I'm not in that bidding war.
Oh man, yeah. No, I can see it. And before we wrap up, I'll give you one team as I look across the landscape. There's one team that I feel like if they were to deal him, because the hard part for dealing for Shohei is if you were to deal him, what would you actually get back? Because everybody knows it's a rental. So you would have to identify a team that has enough in abundance in terms of prospects that they would be willing to shell out maybe one top level prospect, maybe a second tier prospect on top of that, because they would understand, like, we're bringing him here to help us, and now we probably won't be able to keep him, but we'll give you something so it feels worthwhile. And there is one team that sticks out to me like a sore thumb, especially seeing what they're doing, and it is the Baltimore Orioles. That team is so loaded. Here's what's amazing about the Baltimore Orioles. This team is still 2 years ahead of schedule from where they should be. But because of the Adley Rutschmans and some of the other guys they brought up who have made impacts on the major league. But Gunnar Henderson, some of these guys who came up and are bona fide major league players right now, they stunk for so long that they have so much talent that's log jammed in their system. You may have to give up one of your young arms in the minors, like a Grayson Rodriguez or a DL Hall, guys they're really high on that they wouldn't want to. But if Shohei can steal you a World Series before you were even ready to compete for one, because you're still loaded with talent and you're still going to be in contention in the top of the American League East, and you can kind of turn yourselves into the Atlanta Braves of the American League because you're just so young and so deep and ready to win for the next 10 years. Shohei might be worth taking a stab at least calling him up and saying, hey, take DL Hall and take what do you need? You need an outfielder, you need a corner. You need a corner. You need a corner guy in your infield because Rendon, who knows what you get from him. All right, we'll give you Kobe Mayo and we'll give you DL Hall. If I'm the Angels, I might take it because those are two guys that you're going to be able to. One, you're going to stick in your rotation in next year. And I know, yeah, giving up before, but no one is realistically going to do it because you don't want to hamstring yourself in terms of your future for a guy that's going to go end up. Let's call a spade. While we wrap this up, his ass is wearing Dodger blue next year. We know this shit. We know it. They cleared out all that cap space because he's going to be a damn Dodger. I know. And Steve Cohen is going to throw absurd amounts of money at him. He might even offer him $1 billion in a stake of ownership in the damn Mets because the man is crazy and he wants to win. But we know where Shohei's going. Everyone knows he's going to the Dodgers next year. If he doesn't, it would be one of the biggest shocks in free agency history because we all can see we can read the tea leaves. You're not going to get what you can't. What did Jalen Rose say? You don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. You got to take what's there. If someone is willing to give you one of their top 5 prospects in their organization that you know is going to be a stud for you next year and beyond, I just think you got to do it. And I'll just leave it there.
So, right to put a bow on all this, and as we wrap up, if the Angels are trading him, they're demanding the top prospect, maybe top 2 prospects, and a couple of Bs. Right, that's where the 4 comes in. Right, you need to be able to fill behind him because Shohei isn't one player. He's
2.
Cy Young and MVP. So you need the top hitting prospect and the top pitching prospect out of anybody who's going to trade him. If you call Perry Manasseh, you better be ready to pony up at the very least your top pitching and your top hitter as prospect. And then pray you've got enough Bs to make it work. The next thing, right before we wrap up, everybody says he's going to be wearing Dodger blue. The key thing he said that makes me wonder is that he wants to be in a market that is strong with Japanese because that's his culture. He didn't say it outright, but we know that's what he wants. But the thing he did say outright is that he wants to remain fairly anonymous. So New York is out of the market. We know he's not going to New York. He might go to San Francisco. So
nightmare scenario.
My breath. I don't want that to happen. But he could be anonymous in San Francisco. He could be anonymous in LA. To me, those are the top 2 markets for him.
And Seattle. Those are the only 3 that really make sense for him if that check all those qualifications.
I think for him, it's West Coast and anonymity, and those are the 3 markets in play. If he really wants to put the knife in the Angels, it's either going to be the Dodgers or the Mariners because he'll stay in the AL West and get to beat on them. But all that, there's a lot more to unpack as the season goes on. We will be back with more baseball post-trade deadline. We're going to let all this kind of marinate for a little bit. And in the meantime, we got a lot more that you can, check out on our YouTube. If you like what you've been seeing, like what you've been hearing, please, drop a like, subscribe, hit the notification button so you know when we're dropping these. And as always, just thank you for being around.
Yeah, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Fall season's rolling around. There's so much stuff going on. We're going to be a lot more active on our social medias. So you can leave us a like and a follow and subscribe and follow us and everything, because we got a lot more coming down the pipe, guys.